Two nations, no shared border, no direct colonial history between them, and yet Iran and Israel are now in open war. For decades the world watched as these two countries circled each other, through proxy militias, assassinations, cyber attacks and shadow conflicts fought on other people's soil. Most experts warned that direct war was coming. Almost nobody predicted how fast it would arrive. To understand how we got here, you have to go back over a century, to the collapse of an empire, the birth of a nation, and a revolution that changed everything. This is the full story of the Iran-Israel conflict, and why the Middle East will never be the same again. At the start of the 20th century, the entire Middle East was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, a vast Islamic empire that had ruled the region for over 600 years. But by 1900, the Ottoman Empire was crumbling. Corruption, military defeats, and internal rebellions had weakened it beyond recovery. European powers, Britain and France in particular, were circling like vultures waiting to carve up its territory. Then came World War I. The Ottomans sided with Germany. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. When Germany lost in 1918, the Ottoman Empire collapsed entirely. Britain and France stepped in and divided the Middle East between themselves, drawing borders that had never existed before, cutting across ethnic, religious and tribal lines with almost no regard for the people who lived there. Britain took control of a territory called Mandatory Palestine, a strip of land on the eastern Mediterranean that was home to a majority Arab Muslim population, a significant Arab Christian minority, and a small but growing Jewish community. And it was here that the seeds of everything that followed were planted. For centuries, Jewish people across Europe had faced persecution, pogroms in Russia, discrimination across the continent. A growing movement called Zionism had emerged in the late 19th century with a simple but profound idea. Jewish people needed a homeland of their own where they could never again be persecuted. That homeland, Zionists argued, should be Palestine, the ancient biblical homeland of the Jewish people. The British had made promises to everyone during World War I. They promised the Arabs independence if they revolted against the Ottomans. They promised Jewish leaders support for a homeland in Palestine through the Balfour Declaration of 1917. These promises directly contradicted each other, and Britain knew it. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased dramatically, particularly as persecution of Jews in Europe intensified under the rise of Adolf Hitler. Arab Palestinians watched with growing alarm as the demographics of their homeland shifted. Tensions between Jewish and Arab communities escalated into violence. Britain struggled to maintain order, increasingly caught between two peoples with competing and irreconcilable claims to the same land. Then came the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish people murdered by Nazi Germany. The world was horrified. International support for a Jewish homeland reached a peak that could not be ignored. Britain, exhausted and broken by World War II, handed the problem to the newly formed United Nations and walked away. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was declared. Within hours, the United States recognized it. The Soviet Union followed. The Arab world reacted with fury. The very next day, 5 Arab armies, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq and Lebanon, invaded the newborn state with the stated intention of destroying it before it could take root. What followed was the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Israel, against almost every military prediction, survived. Not only survived, it expanded, ending the war controlling more territory than the United Nations partition plan had originally allocated. For Israelis, this was the War of Independence, a miracle, the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. Entire villages were destroyed. A refugee crisis was created that still hasn't been resolved today. Now, where was Iran in all of this? In 1948, Iran was a constitutional monarchy ruled by a Shah, a king. Iran was not an Arab country. It was Persian. It had no direct stake in the Palestinian cause in the way Arab nations did. And crucially, Iran under the Shah actually had relatively normal diplomatic relations with Israel. The two countries even cooperated on intelligence and military matters. So how did Iran go from a quiet neighbor to Israel's most dangerous enemy? The answer lies in one of the most dramatic political upheavals of the 20th century. Through the 1950s, 60s and 70s, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a modernizer. He pushed Western-style reforms, women's rights, land redistribution, industrialization. He was strongly pro-American and strongly anti-communist. But the Shah's grip on power was not as secure as it appeared. In 1951, Iran's parliament elected a new prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, a hugely popular democratic nationalist who had one defining mission: take back control of Iran's oil industry from the British, who had been extracting and profiting from Iranian oil for decades, while ordinary Iranians saw almost nothing. Mossadegh nationalized the Iranian oil industry. Britain was furious. America was alarmed. In August 1953, the Shah, sensing the political tide turning against him, fled Iran entirely, first to Iraq, then to Rome. What happened next would shape the entire trajectory of the Middle East. The CIA and British intelligence launched a covert operation, codenamed Operation Ajax. They paid street gangs to cause chaos in Tehran. They bribed Iranian military officers. They orchestrated protests against Mossadegh. Within days, his government collapsed. He was arrested and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The Shah was flown back to Iran and restored to power, now more dependent on America than ever before. For America and Britain, it was a strategic victory. Iranian oil was safe. A pro-Western government was back in control. For Iranians, it was something else entirely. Their democratically elected leader had been overthrown by foreign powers to protect foreign oil interests. The humiliation was total, and it was never forgotten. The Shah ruled with increasing authoritarianism through the 1960s and 70s. His secret police, the Savak, imprisoned, tortured, and killed political opponents. Dissent was crushed. But Iran was oil-rich and strategically vital. America looked the other way. Underneath the surface, Iranian society was boiling. In 1979, the pressure exploded. Mass protests swept Iran. The Shah's government collapsed. He fled the country in January 1979 and died in exile the following year. Into the power vacuum stepped Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a radical Shia Islamic cleric who had spent years in exile preaching a revolutionary ideology that combined Islamic law with fierce opposition to American and Western influence in the Muslim world. Khomeini returned to Iran to a reception of millions. The Islamic Republic of Iran was declared a theocracy, a government ruled by religious law and religious leaders. Almost overnight, the entire character of Iran changed. The Shah's secular Western-oriented government was replaced by an Islamic revolutionary government that saw America as the great Satan and Israel as its illegitimate ally planted in the heart of the Muslim world. Israel's embassy in Tehran was handed over to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Iran went from being one of Israel's quiet partners to its most vocal and dangerous enemy, not because the facts on the ground had changed, but because the ideology of the government had. And then something happened that made the relationship between Iran and the West permanently toxic. In November 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took 52 American diplomats hostage. They were held for 444 days. The hostage crisis destroyed any possibility of reconciliation between Iran and America for a generation, and Iran's hostility to Israel, which America backed, hardened into permanent ideological doctrine. In September 1980, with Iran weakened by revolution and international isolation, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 brutal years. Over 1 million people died. Iran fought with revolutionary fervor, but was outgunned and internationally isolated. America and much of the West quietly backed Iraq. The war had 2 lasting consequences for the Iran-Israel conflict. First, it convinced Iran's revolutionary leadership that they needed to develop their own advanced military capabilities and could never rely on foreign support. This thinking would eventually drive Iran's nuclear program. Second, Iran developed and deepened its strategy of supporting proxy militias across the region, groups that could fight Iran's enemies without Iran having to fight directly. The most significant of these was Hezbollah, a Shia militant group founded in Lebanon in 1982 with direct Iranian support, weapons, training and funding. Hezbollah's primary stated purpose was resistance against Israel. Iran had found a way to wage war against Israel without firing a single shot from Iranian soil. The proxy strategy was born. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Iran steadily developed its nuclear program, officially claiming it was for civilian energy purposes. Israel and the West were deeply skeptical. A nuclear-armed Iran was Israel's worst nightmare, an ideologically hostile regime that openly called for Israel's destruction with a nuclear weapon was an existential threat that Israel could not tolerate. Israel responded in several ways. Covert sabotage operations targeted Iranian nuclear scientists. Several were assassinated in operations widely attributed to Israeli intelligence. The Stuxnet computer virus, believed to be a joint American-Israeli creation, was used to physically destroy Iranian nuclear centrifuges. Iran responded by deepening its proxy network. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian-backed militias across Iraq and Syria. A ring of armed groups surrounding Israel on every side, all funded, trained and armed by Tehran. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, briefly offered a diplomatic off-ramp. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of international sanctions. Israel furiously opposed the deal, arguing it didn't go far enough. In 2018, US President Donald Trump withdrew from the deal. His reasons were multiple. He argued the deal's sunset clauses meant key nuclear restrictions would simply expire after 10 to 15 years, delaying rather than preventing Iran getting a nuclear bomb. He argued it failed to address Iran's ballistic missile program and didn't include strong enough inspection mechanisms. The White House and Netanyahu's presentation of Israeli intelligence claiming Iran had secretly pursued nuclear weapons directly influenced Trump's decision to withdraw. What makes this decision genuinely controversial is this. International monitors had repeatedly certified that Iran was in full compliance with the deal. Every other signatory, Britain, France, Germany, China, Russia, urged Trump to stay in and build on it. He withdrew anyway. The consequences were severe. Iran, stripped of the sanctions relief the deal had promised, gradually abandoned its own commitments and accelerated its nuclear program. The world was left in a worse position than before the deal had existed. Through the 2010s and into the 2020s, Iran and Israel fought what analysts called a shadow war, a continuous low-level conflict conducted through assassinations, cyber attacks, airstrikes and proxy forces rather than direct military confrontation. Israel conducted hundreds of airstrikes in Syria targeting Iranian weapon shipments to Hezbollah. Iran retaliated through its proxies. Then in September 2024, Israel carried out one of the most audacious intelligence operations in modern history. Israeli intelligence had spent years creating a shell corporation in Hungary to manufacture pagers for Hezbollah, secretly lacing the batteries with explosives. Then, on September 17th, thousands of pagers exploded simultaneously across Lebanon and Syria, killing 42 people and injuring over 4,000. The following day, walkie-talkies exploded in a second wave. The attack took 1,500 Hezbollah fighters out of action and was described as Hezbollah's biggest security breach since the conflict began. Days later, Israel delivered its most devastating blow yet. Israeli intelligence had spent months tracking Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah for over 30 years and one of the most powerful militant figures in the Middle East. They knew he was meeting with senior Hezbollah commanders in an underground bunker buried 60 feet beneath a residential apartment block in the Daria suburb of Beirut. On September 27, 2024, the Israeli Air Force struck. 80 bombs were dropped on the building in a single coordinated strike. The underground bunker, built to withstand almost any conventional attack, was obliterated. The apartment blocks above it collapsed entirely into rubble. Hassan Nasrallah was killed, along with several senior Hezbollah commanders and an Iranian Revolutionary Guard general who had been sent by Khamenei himself to warn Nasrallah his life was in danger. Iran's ring of proxies, built over decades at enormous cost, was being systematically dismantled. The shadow war came dangerously close to becoming a real one in 2024. In April, Israel bombed the Iranian consulate annex in Damascus, Syria, killing 2 Iranian generals and 7 other senior IRGC officers. Bombing a diplomatic mission on foreign soil was widely seen as a significant escalation and a crossing of a major red line. Iran retaliated on April 13th with over 300 drones and missiles, its first ever direct attack on Israeli soil. Israel and its allies intercepted 99% of them. Then in October 2024, Iran launched a second missile attack. This time, Iran pointed to Israel's assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, and senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander Abbas Nilfarushan as its justification. This is a crucial point for understanding the conflict fairly. Every Iranian attack in 2024 was presented as a direct response to an Israeli action, whether you accept that justification or not, and many do not. The sequence of events matters. Neither side in this conflict has clean hands. Israel struck back, destroying much of Iran's air defense systems and demonstrating it could strike deep inside Iranian territory at will. Iran was faced with a stark choice: watch its regional strategy collapse entirely, or escalate directly. We cannot tell this story without October 7, 2023. Hamas, funded and supported by Iran, launched the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. 1,200 Israelis were killed, 250 were taken hostage. Israel's response was ferocious. A ground invasion of Gaza followed. By the end of 2024, over 40,000 Palestinians had been killed, the majority women and children, according to Gaza health authorities. The United Nations called the humanitarian situation catastrophic. A growing number of international legal scholars began using the word genocide. Israel rejected that entirely. The Gaza war accelerated everything. It activated Iran's proxy network, it radicalized populations across the region, and it gave Israel's government the political mandate to pursue its enemies, including Iran itself, more aggressively than at any point in its history. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated military campaign against Iran, Operation Epic Fury. US B-2 stealth bombers struck Iran's ballistic missile facilities, while Israeli jets hit targets across all 31 of Iran's provinces. Key sites in Tehran were struck, including the state broadcaster and the historic Golistan Palace. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed, along with multiple senior commanders and officials. The civilian cost has been severe. A US-Israeli airstrike hit a girls' school in southern Iran, killing at least 165 children. Iran retaliated immediately. Coordinated drone and missile attacks were launched across the Middle East, hitting the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Iran's Revolutionary Guard declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, one of the world's most critical oil shipping lanes. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned the hardest hits on Iran are yet to come. What happens next, nobody knows. Will Iran's government survive? Will the Iranian people rise up? Will the Strait of Hormuz remain closed, sending global energy prices into crisis? Will this become a wider regional war? What we do know is this: everything happening right now has roots that stretch back over a century, to a collapsing empire, to promises made and broken by colonial powers, to a revolution, to decades of proxy war, assassination and a nuclear standoff that brought the world to the edge. So that brings us to the end of this video. The bombs are still falling, the fires are still burning, and nobody knows how this ends. But now you know how it started. If this video helped you understand one of the most complex conflicts in the world, hit subscribe, because this is exactly what this channel is for, and we post new videos every week. We'll see you next time.